What's up, everyone, and welcome to ClearTalk. So we are here today. We're awaiting the press conference, the Biden press conference from the White House. It was supposed to have been at, uh, from what I understood, 6:30 Eastern, which would have been 5:30 Central. Um, it is now 6 o'clock, and it still has not happened. So I don't know if I got mixed up on that. Maybe it actually is 6:30 Central. I'm a little confused. But they started this back at 5:30, which makes more sense. Actually, I think it was they started before 5:30. So I started about 5:20. Um, and it um, still has not come to to happen yet, which is not good, quite frankly. I mean, this whole press conference was supposed to be for Democrats to see that Biden is there, ready to take questions. Big, this is the big boy conference, whatever that's supposed to mean. And this, honestly, being now 30 minutes late, does not bode very well for that as far as appearance wise. Now, I guess you could throw up, depending upon what was going on. Maybe they're waiting on certain press. I doubt that. Or that, because they finished up the NATO session. Um, it was roughly around 4:45 or so that they finished that up. 4:40, something like that. Um, where they were, had been talking with Zelensky, was in Washington, asking for further support from NATO and whatnot. They were going through all that, which of course he did get further support, um, and and I might make a separate video about that, but so whatever has happened between then and now, depending upon getting him ready and prepared or whatnot, I don't know. But we are now over 30 minutes past time. Because, like I said, this was supposed to be the the big boy conference. Showing, because he has not had a whole lot of live like conferences, especially with the press. He is, as far as presidentially, he has the least amount of appearances before the press than any modern day president for the past few decades, at least. So, and I think that even goes back further than that. But he has the least appearances, not only press conference wise, but I think just live appearances. Period. He has the least, which of course we all know why that is. We all know that's because of his age. They've been trying to hold it back. There's no doubt there. That's been speculated and talked about now for a long time. Almost his entire presidency, honestly. I mean, that's the whole idea back when, during the him being elected in the first place, that he was the sleepy Joe. Nobody saw him. He didn't do anything. All he had to do was sit in his, uh, stay hidden, and he won the presidency. Um, but yeah, that's been, but it is obviously here lately become very blatantly obvious that something's going on, um, and that he's having trouble. They've said that it has been stated that he wakes up fine, but around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoons when he starts to actually lose energy. Probably like most typical uh, people of his age, I guess you could say, at least to some degree, probably on average. But he himself, apparently, I have not seen the video, but I've seen it reported that he himself, a few days ago, during either a like talk show thing or something, some kind of appearance he made, or called in to, or something, where he made the comment about he just didn't need something something to the effect of he just didn't need to do events after 8 o'clock. And I think there's like this thing of where, like, he goes to bed at 8 o'clock. like like I guess normally, as long as he, as long as he can, I guess, not doing some sort of presidential act, he goes to bed at 8 o'clock. Um, and there's, of course, it's been said that there were quite a few presidents that was their, like normal bedtime. Um, but even Reagan, I think. But anyway, so that there was the excuse through that, but him stating making that type of statement, I'm sure, was something that they did not want to be said publicly like that. But anyway, uh, but yeah, that's what we have going on, because there's been a lot of the Democratic congressmen and establishment faces and stuff that have come out against him, wanting him to step down. They had a big op-ed that was put out in the New York Times by George Clooney, who is apparently a big friend of Obama and also of Biden, and it was even said that he like contacted Obama before having this op-ed put in and making sure that it was okay for him to do so. And Obama did not stop him. Let's just put it that way. And he put the op-ed in, basically calling for Biden to step down. Saying that he loved him and that he was a great guy, been a great president, but it was time for him to step down, basically. Um, and so that shows that even there is some behind the scenes thing going on with even Obama, maybe not directly influencing or trying to make chess moves, but maybe indirectly. I don't know. Um, to get him to step down. But this conference was supposed to be the big thing for this week. The first live event that he's done in forever, where he's going to have hard punches given to him by the press, because the press right now, I think, is actually quite angry and frustrated and annoyed because they feel, particularly, that they have been lied to here recently by Karine Jean-Pierre, the spokesperson for the White House, who I quite frankly loathe. Um, but she has just blatantly lied about some certain things here lately, and has had to come back and sort of admit that it actually was going on, that she had lied about. Well, she didn't say she lied, but she was admitting to what she previously lied about. Um, and so you have a lot of the press feeling frustrated and annoyed and angry that they have been lied to here recently about the health of the president, the idea around a neurologist that has been making visits to the White House over the past few months, um, and in talks, and he's like his main thing is Parkinson's, which is the big argument now going around, is that, or the speculation, I guess, that um, Biden is having some sort of onset of Parkinson's. At what degree, I would assume probably more early stage, but that's the argument, or the discussion going on, is that certain symptoms, or the symptoms of Parkinson's, like motor functioning and certain things that comes along with Parkinson's, step by step, is happening, or can be seen in some of the things that Biden is doing publicly. So that's the concern, is that that's concern that the press has been pushing the past few days hard, is that, about the Parkinson's, and whether or not he's been taking any kind of medication for it, been diagnosed with it, or anything like that. And of course, the pushback is constantly, or the answer is constantly, no, 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 no. And that's not what the doctor was here for, and blah 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 blah. But there's a deep feeling that that is not correct. um, so yeah, that's what we're waiting on is this press conference. I wanted to come to. I actually, like I said, I actually attempted or started this video on my phone in the car. I was going to do a, on the road again, clear talk, and and I was doing the video. This was, it was not coming on, but I was talking about all this stuff, and then suddenly the video, about, I guess it was between me having the live stream up and then me trying to video myself. The phone didn't like that and it wound up cutting the stream off, and then I was trying to bring it back up and it was acting like it didn't want to do it, like it was just being silly. But I was able to get in here, obviously, and do this without the worry of it actually happening while I was trying to get here. For us to both watch it, um, for you to watch it with me, and you get my first reactions, initial reactions to it and whatnot. Um, so the big thing, the question, like I brought up in the video yesterday, was about, you know whether or not, uh about all of this and trying to get him to step down, and who. My question now, and the question that is to come, is within who, or it's been discussed, is that who will be stepping in, like who possibly could take his place effectively in this short amount of time period before the election, and be successful enough to actually uh, win the election and beat Donald Trump. There's a lot of legal argument with it. Something that they could do at the convention is release Biden's delegates to somebody to take those delegates to get the nomination and then proceed. The only legally, though, technically legally, because of the campaign rules and laws and whatnot, the only one that can legally take those delegates right now is Kamala Harris, because she's on the ticket, because she's the VP. So she technically is legally the only one that can actually take those delegates to get the nomination to be for the election. Now there's potential that they could try to change those rules or change something to open up for it to be more of an open delegate process and get more names in there. There's been a few governors' names have been thrown out there. But for me personally, I feel like I have my disagreements, and I don't particularly like Kamala Harris. Although I don't necessarily dislike her either. I just don't like all of her policies or all of her, and the fact that she is so corporate, neoconish. But she has had potential in the past to lean, and has had past support, like supported left leaning type of ideas, progressive ideas. So I feel like she does have the potential to be moved in that direction, potentially, or at least humor progressive ideas. So I feel like there is something there with her. I even feel on, like, foreign affairs, particularly in when we're talking about Israel and Gaza and the situation going over there. While she has been there and been a part of this, um, been a part in this Biden White House in decisions that they have made for supporting Israel and supporting this war, or if you want to call it a war, the genocide. Um, she has had moments where, in speeches, I think they've held her back, but she has had moments in speeches where she has actually had some quite strong words against it, or like, not in particularly in favor of it, um, or certain aspects of it. So there is potential there. I see also in her maybe even being pushed to change the policies towards this conflict, if she was to take that. So there's potential there. Now, whether she actually does, and or whether she just continues with the way things have been going, that's, would be up in the air, and we wouldn't know until it actually happened. But I do feel like there's potential there. There's potential. She doesn't seem to completely be on in full support, anyways, of the actions that have been taken so far. But the fact that she is VP, for me, I feel like she automatically would have more name recognition for the average voter than anybody else. While there are some of the governors and stuff that do have name recognition, when you talk about the collective of average voters and what they know, or names that they would know, Kamala is going to be the name that they know the most, more than any of these governors. Yeah, there will be a certain percentage of the electorate that would know, some of the governors and stuff, but not the majority. So I feel like Kamala would have the benefit there, at least, for as far as just name recognition, and when they go to the ballot box, seeing the name and being like, oh yeah, this is what I'm gonna vote for this, instead of Trump or whoever, or just the fact of voting at all, right? Knowing that there is actually somebody there that they feel, and that's where she would most certainly take all the Biden votes. I don't feel like anybody who is steadfast and determined to vote for Biden is going to see Kamala take the reign and be like, nah, I'm not going to vote for Kamala. I feel like she would most certainly take all those votes. The concern with Biden is that the independents and people who haven't decided to vote for Biden, not necessarily because they haven't, decided between Biden and Trump, but just the fact of just voting for Biden, period, or voting, period, or whatever the case, or voting for a third party or whatever. Whether or not she would be able to coalesce that group and take and gain or sustain any that would vote for Biden or potentially would vote for Biden, hold that or even gain votes. And I feel like she potentially could even gain votes there. And hold those. At least hold those. Easier than any other person. So I think that would be the best, in my opinion. Not to mention just the fact that she should have the respect at this point to be the one. Now, I do feel like if they were to decide to hold some type of open, delicate process and other names be thrown in the basket, I feel like there should be some sort of digital voting or something that the American people could actually tap into, so that there is some sort of feeling that from the electorate that they had a choice in the matter, instead of it just being thrown on them, although Biden somewhat was technically thrown on them anyways. But it, that would help. What, even if it's like, during the conference, they do this, like, I feel like a lot, or at least the ones that are the most tuned into politics is going to be watching the convention. So even if you did some sort of like, okay, so go to WW whatever and vote. Who would you particularly, out of this list of whatever, 3, 4, 5 names, whatever the case, and you and vote who you would prefer to be the candidate. Kind of like a quick, fast-paced, immediate, like, primary of sorts at the convention. At least you would have some. At least they would have the argument to say that, this was as democratic as we could make it, right? In such a quick way, in fashion, a speedy fashion, to go ahead, so that there's no, like, delay on the campaign continuing with the new elector, electee or whatever. I feel like that would be the smartest thing to do, to, like, cross all T's and all that, and look as democratic as possible. Would you then have everybody's, of course not, and not everybody's going to do it. Not everybody's going to know that they can do it. But I feel like, at least to some degree, you could say, you could argue that they tried to be as democratic as possible. Which, and honestly, at this point, would be way more democratic than they were in the actual initial so-called primary that they didn't really even have. Where they completely ignored, Marianne Williamson and Cenk Uyghur and what's the other guy's name? I still am blanking on his name. Oh my gosh, I feel bad. This doesn't start with a D. Anyways, the other guy, the representative, where they completely just ignored those three altogether, and which is the worst thing you can have done to you. Bad publicity is better than no publicity. But yeah, so that's what I feel about that. And then I have another, I guess, humorous thing I heard today, and would be very interesting, is that obviously Kamala would have, she would have the top and be the most. She would have the top and have the initial first stamp at being the the electee. But then who would she pick as VP? And while there are probably some names that would be thrown out there, one funny one that has been thrown out there, especially online and on the left, is if she, as a way to completely coalesce the entire Democratic Party, your corporate wing, neocon, centrist, whatever, and the left-leaning progressive side of the party, all together to get the votes needed to take out Donald Trump. And they've thrown out the name Bernie Sanders. A Kamala and Bernie ticket, for starters, I would be 100% behind. I think that would be the absolute best ticket that they could possibly put forward. For those reasons and many more. I think it would be fantastic. Now, immediately, the argument against Bernie is the same argument that some have, or at least for some, would be the same argument that they have against Biden, and that's age. Here's where the issue is. The problem with Biden is not as much as his age, is and how he is performing at his age. The actions and stuff that he is doing or not doing. His speech, his spacing and incoherency, fumbling and gaffes and stuff that he has had, and it's continuously gotten worse and more evident as we've, gotten to this point. That is the problem. If Biden was not having those issues, this would not even be a discussion. And when you look at Bernie Sanders, even though Bernie Sanders is older than Biden, he clearly does not have those issues. He hasn't missed a step. He cognitively and being able to put a coherent sentence together, an idea, and have an entire discussion for as long as he wants. He has had no misstep there. He mentally and physically is just as good as he was 5-10 years ago, almost. I mean, so there is a different argument there. It's not all about age. It's about how you're performing at your age. That's the issue with Biden, where that issue does not really exist with Bernie. So I actually think that really wouldn't be an issue. It would be for some, but I don't think that would be the overall issue, though, in the fact in the argument that is most likely not going to happen, and probably not even remotely in the minds of anyone who would be over that process, is simply the same reason why they completely coalesced and went against him in 2020. Because after the first 3 primary states, it was almost clear as day the presumptive nominee was going to be Bernie. But that clearly they coalesced together and made that change. But here we are. I'm going to have to put the muffs on so I can hear.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Let me switch over.
Well, good evening.
Here we are.
We just concluded this year's NATO summit, and the consensus among the members was it was a great success. It was especially momentous because it represented the 75th year of the most important military defense alliance in the world's history of the world. We should never forget that NATO grew out of the wreckage of World War II, the most destructive war in history. The idea was to create an alliance of free and democratic nations that would commit themselves to a compact of collective defense. Standing together, they knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows if they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. But this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. I directed the intelligence community to be a significant amount of intelligence be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion. Then in February, some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought, as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO is not only stronger, NATO is bigger because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance, and it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear.
I feel like he is like nervous as hell right now.
That he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine,
He knows how
here's what he
important this
said.
is.
It was genius. It was wonderful.
And right now he's
Some of
talking
you
from a
forgot that, but that's
teleprompter.
exactly what he said.
So
But I made it clear, a strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I would remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than a political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know. The answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances. I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We're an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to three other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further.
Barely.
Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables.
Gas
and
is
other
certainly
necessities.
not really going
And
down.
economists tell us
Keeps
that would cost
fluctuating.
the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East.
Come on, man.
6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7, That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas.
When?
So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues.
They are not in
There's
agreement.
still gaps to close.
That's a
We're
lie.
making progress. The trend is positive, and I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given
All right, here we go.
a list of people
Where
to
are we-
call on here.
A list of
Reuters,
people?
Jeff Mason.
Ah, man, come on.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My
Well,
question
they
for
didn't
you is,
just
how are you
endorse you, but-
incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she's not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one.
You mean Harris?
The fact is
oh my
that
gosh.
the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long
He's
time.
reading. He's reading.
The idea that
These are planned
senators
questions.
and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving.
No incumbent
Moving.
with low in
Because,
numbers,
look,
his
I got more
numbers
work to
has
do.
won
I
a
got more work
presidency.
to finish. There's so much, we made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million.
Just to state that there
so
were
things are
incumbents
moving.
with lower numbers
We got
doesn't
more to
mean
go.
anything.
Working class people still
None of
need
them with
help.
those numbers
Corporate
ever
greed is
made,
still at large.
ever won the
Their
presidency.
Prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down, and so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about your, you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today.
That he did.
And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the
And he
President
just
of France,
mixed up again.
the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. And officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody
I had
suggests
5 other names. What are you talking about?
that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is, well, anyway,
There he goes.
I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time. And
That's the
finally,
kind of stuff
a
that they-
world leader who didn't think it was.
that they're
Next
afraid
one.
that he can't continue
Sorry,
a
Nancy
thought.
Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. That under my plans so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an economist, a mainstream economist who said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic, doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase in corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better. And we talk about how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States?
He's going through all his talking
40%
points.
of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming in the bean. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies. All three, and by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. And like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well, but the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many.
Well, he has nothing to do,
roughly
but,
20
I mean.
major events. Some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to
Or
keep
getting
it all in that
old.
style. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, I'm sorry. Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on
Who's the mic
Felicia's
girl?
question there, leaders of your own party have said that
That's kinda
they're not
awkward.
worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term and the near or abroad into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. But if he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, and the weaponry we're getting to him?
That's certainly what he was asking for.
I got a more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is where I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to,
Bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. What we got here?
I hate this. Him having to call on people. It's so unnatural.
Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
Huh.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that
We have a different
Donald
mic
Trump
girl.
may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just a few minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. He'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point.
He acted like he didn't know what
seems to have
NATO
an
was.
affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland.
Although he could have been
Nobody,
making a
including
joke,
the
but
people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine. I said, you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. No, that's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? In my office, I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help?
it was
And
good
I
that he
did.
kind of corrected
It
himself
wasn't
there.
automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes.
Although I don't know if that was true either, but
I beg your pardon? And so Finland
I didn't hear what he
joined
said.
NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they were already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe, I can't recall whether he said it publicly or in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind it being repeated. He said, we decided in Finland, the people
Whoever that
of
was probably
Finland
got reprimanded.
decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places.
Bouncer
to
stood
agree
up
to
and
the
was like, "Hey,
expansion.
be quiet."
But it expanded. And they're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. And we were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it, and we're just going to get stronger. David Sanger.
You could argue that he's doing a decent job of answering,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
even though this is very controlled.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating. They're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we have to make clear. China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that Xi understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so we, for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. If you want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules. And you don't have the authority, and that you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Do you have a strategy to interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them as a consequence of that, their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it.
It's like everything's working
But
in slow motion. It's like,
we need a new industrial
come on,
policy
get there.
in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to, it came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe and Japan, to be able to generate the kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems. Not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out, that they went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
Mr. President, I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. And, but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem.
That's not what he means.
First
but,
of all,
okay.
in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me to the exact number, but I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life, but they've also lost over 350,000.
I have to admit, this is going longer than I thought it was.
Killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there. They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell through the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anyone else has. We just put together with, today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Assam from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR. I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to
Two good questions.
when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli War Cabinet, I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. Some of the reporters around here cover me all the time have heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel. But This war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt to all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate.
He's not really answering
in
the question. He's
transition
just sort of
so that they could keep the peace
transferred
in
into
Gaza
talking about what he's
without-
done.
without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel on the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to access, get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I've put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port we attached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful. But
That was a
that's
complete
why when I went
disaster.
to Israel immediately after the massacres that occurred at the hands of Hamas, that the one thing I said to the Israelis, and I met with the War Cabinet and with Bibi, don't make the same mistake America made after bin Laden. There's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation and trying to unite Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys.
He's trying to pull
Sinwar
back on his
Company.
superlative
and all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed.
sayings
I'm
or
not
whatnot, trying to
providing
correct
2,000
himself,
pound
like
bombs.
so
They
that
cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. But remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than most, there is a growing dissatisfaction on the West Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts.
I don't know about that.
I just have to keep moving to make sure that we get as much done as we can.
But
toward a
basically, he just
ceasefire.
wishes he would have been able to
A
convince
ceasefire
them.
and get those.
when he
And
didn't.
by the way, look at
I
the
don't know.
numbers in
Talk
Israel.
more firm.
I mean, my numbers are better in Israel than they are here. But then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway,
Bridge candidacy in 2020. You referred to yourself as being a bridge candidate for a younger, fresher generation of Democratic leaders, and I wanted to know what changed.
what changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think, I won't put words in anybody's mouth. Most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed. And what I realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom to know how to deal with the Congress to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen. And I want to finish it, to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and hadn't inherited what I did, and we just moved things along. Anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
That was a fall apart there.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh
I mean, he
Weinberg,
could
I'm
have,
sorry.
if he was so concerned, though, he could have just
I'll do
used
2 more
that
questions.
knowledge and experience
Thank you,
to
Mr.
teach
President.
or,
Many
you
of
know,
your colleagues,
prepare
Democrats on the
someone
Hill,
like
are
Kamala to
watching
take
tonight
over and
as they
then.
assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about whether how the next week or 2 goes would inform your?
Am I using that way, you say?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out, you know, for the longest time it was, you know, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, you know, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events, from Wisconsin to North Carolina to, anyway, to demonstrate that I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade people to move our way, or people are already there. And here, look, the other thing is, we have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time. We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters, I forget exactly how many, I want to cite a number and then find out I'm off, but we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized, we're moving, and that's awful hard to replace.
I'm covering
in the
up,
near
but
term. And so,
these
and here's the other
signers are
I was in the
hilarious.
Senate a long time.
How
Very proud of
like
what I've
animated
done in
they
the
are.
Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman or ranking member and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. Anyway, I'm going to be going around making the case of the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea, we're sitting around, this is where Kamala's so good as well. We're sitting around, more children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death. The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promise the NRA, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. You got a Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous.
He
There's
suddenly
so
got
much
some
we can do
spunk.
still, and I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too, but I remember I made a speech on democracy in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. And I'm not being critical, just observing. The bulk of the press said, what the hell is he talking about that for? Democracy. You did. Democracy is not an issue. Democracy is not an issue. Except the polling data showed 60% of the people knew I was right, thought I was right. I'm not asking you a question. You don't have to answer, obviously. But do you think our democracy is under siege based on this court? Do you think democracy is under siege based on Project 2025? Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education, make sure, I mean,
Be a dictator
we've never
for a
been here
day?
before. And that's the other reason why you say hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. I've got to finish this job because there's so much at stake.
We've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, two things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February. And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity, the decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff and I said, I'm going to go to South Korea and we're going to get the chip.
The correct
What are you
answer
doing?
is yes.
I'm gonna
I'll
get
take one.
Japan and Korea
Simple
back
as
together
that.
again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move.
Doesn't
and see
matter
if we
what
can
you
expand
have
it.
had. The question is, are you willing to
The
take
only
one
thing age
just
does
to
is help you with
help to do
creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay
subside
attention.
concerns
And so the point I'm
that
making
people have
is,
currently,
I
not
think it's important
months ago.
that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out, hadn't hidden a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his, okay? I laid it all out. And every single day I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again, I'll do it. But no one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam, I'll do it. But that's where I am. Haley Bull,
Okay.
Scripps.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said you're making decisions on a
So
day-to-day
this, I
basis when
guess,
it
is the
comes to
last
support
question.
for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia? And if I may, your convention is coming up where your delegates are pledged to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I get overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a
There
sudden I
was no
show up at the
primary, but
convention, everybody
whatever.
says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Even if that means they vote for someone else?
Sure. Look, I'll end this with this. I served in the Senate a long time. I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think the top if they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least a purple, it was a red state when I started, in terms of we now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate. If they think that, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them, then they're going to run away. I get it. But so far, go and look at the polling data in their states. Look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge, and you're all experts, I'm not being solicitous about the president, you're experts on this stuff. How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. When the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. So bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started, I mean, it
What?
hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot
What are
can
you
happen.
talking?
But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, you know, we talk about, you know, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
Mr. President,
Okay. Thank you.
This ends tonight's press conference. Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that.
Okay,
to
now we got
mock
some
your
free
age
balls.
and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
I thought maybe there'd be a little bit more bantering, but they went ahead and got him off. Or he just walked on off. Okay. Well, that was actually way longer than I expected it to be. It's almost an hour. I'm actually surprised. I thought that at best we might get 30 minutes. I mean, I think he did a little bit better at answering questions than I expected him to.
Good evening.
Whoa. Why that popped up. But yeah, so I think he did better than most actually probably expected him to as far as answering the questions. He actually talked way more than I expected him to. I thought he was going to be a little bit more quick and but he did have his moments where he seemed to that everybody's concerned with. He seemed to slow down. He seemed to lose his train of thought and where he was going down and just, you know, kind of stopped, which has been the concern, you know, and you could throw that out to some degree, just Biden being Biden. But there is the concern there that he is, that's a part of the old age and not being able to keep up. It's blatantly obvious he's old. He's slow. His thought process is slow. So he takes time to really talk. He takes time to figure out his words, and then the time it takes for him to figure out the words, and sometimes he loses the words, and you know it's the typical. Everybody is seeing, you know, but it's clearly a decline from what he was even when he's, you know, in 2020 when we became president. It's clearly a decline, and I think that's what everybody's looking at, is that just in the first 4 years you have a major decline in how well he is able to project himself in speech and talk and answering a question and staying on path, and how that is going to, and as much as that has degraded over 4 years, him being able to continue that for another 4 years, that's the concern. As I stated in my video yesterday, that I wasn't as much concerned, or actually in the video, I guess, about him, his interview last week, was that I'm not as concerned about. Well, I am concerned about him winning the presidency, but it's not even so much about him winning the presidency as it is him being able to actually last the whole 4 years. And I think that's the concern. It's like, yeah, okay, great. Even if you do have a good, like, I can take that off. Even if you do have a good, even if he had the absolute best chance to beat Trump, like just to say that his poll numbers were fantastic, and there was no like even discussion as to whether he was going to beat Trump. The concern still is whether or not he's going to be able to maintain and last for 4 years. That's at his age and where he is currently, how he is acting and projecting and uh, losing train of thought and whatnot, and the gaffes constantly happening and everything else. I do think it was they did, spoke of earlier today where he accidentally, in introducing Zelensky, he actually introduced him as Putin. That was sort of an odd, like, I could see that wasn't for me a big deal because I mean, he did fairly quickly turn around and correct himself. I think that is something that you can see clearly in this, that they burrowed into him to, as quickly as possible, correct yourself if you make a mistake and or in saying something or whatever. I think he somewhat, to some degree, kind of over corrected himself a few times. I mean, because he would say something that was a little bit like, hyperbolic as far as just like stating some type of number or something like that, and he'd be like, well, not really that, but he would be a little bit more general. That I feel like that was probably a little bit of an overcorrection, but he was trying to make sure that it was clearly that they told him, make sure that you stay on point as much as possible so that there's the least amount of, like, talking points that they can make after the fact of you being slow and whatnot and blah blah blah. That was clear, but he still had his moments. I still don't feel like this is really going to alleviate those concerns. I think the ask is still going to be there. I think it's going to continue all the way up to the convention. Um, and we still very well could see something happen at the convention to change that, or we might wind up continuing on with him, and he gets the nominee, and it goes on. And like I talked about in last night's video, how I feel like to some degree, you could even, I feel like he even wants to, like, become president, and even if he does even know that he has the potential of not lasting the 4 years, like that's the way he wants to go out. I feel like that's the way he wants to go out. And also help pave a easier way for someone like Kamala. Although, like I said, my argument on the whole, why are you not sticking to your transition presidency that you claimed you were doing to begin with? You could have taken this whole entire time to actually, use your years of experience to prepare someone like Kamala to take over the ticket, and she would have been well equipped to take over if you would have just done that. But instead of pushing this like you are, it's clear that you are so egotistical that you were the only one to be able to continue or keep someone like Trump from becoming president again, that you think you're the only one that can do the job or make sure that and be successful in making that happen. And that's truly the reason why he is doing it again. But anyway, this video is a lot longer than I expected. Like I said, that was a lot longer than I expected. He did okay, but there's clear still, like I said, with some issues there and here and there, that they will clearly, as he even stated at the end, they're going to find something wrong. So I mean, yeah, true. That's the point. I think I think that was really the whole point of this whole thing, was to find something wrong with him. Although we all know there is, or at least speculate that there is. It is what it is. We'll see how things continue and what happens at the convention. I still hope that they find a way to replace him, honestly. Because I just clearly, like I said, even if he has a complete clear chance of getting the presidency, I still don't see him being able to last 4 years. I at best, I still feel like he might can make 2, and that's, I mean, clearly that, you know, he could prove everybody wrong and live another 10 years. Who knows? But well beyond. But I just don't. As much decline has happened over these 4 years, I just don't see. I don't see that happening. I don't see, and not that I'm happy or you know of that or anything. Like I hate it. You know, you don't like seeing anybody decline like that, or especially in the limelight decline like that. You wish they would just be taken out and just able to live their life out, you know, outside of that. But like I said, my speculation is he actually enjoys this. I don't know, but anyway, thank you very much for joining me. And yeah, like, comment, share, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next video. ClearTalk. I'm out.